Hi, welcome to the lecture on environmental adaptation for animals. Now we will consider still on the endotherms and what kind of seasonal changes we have there. So depending on different species, we have different kind of basal metabolic rate at the thermoneutral zone, and then we have upper and lower critical temperature. And if the temperature is lower than the lower critical temperature, we will heat up the animal. And don't we still have that, okay, still some animals have summer fur and winter fur. So we have mechanisms to have these annual changes in the metabolic rate. And we can have three different mechanisms. We have acclimatization of peak metabolic rate. That is very typical for small mammals. And so they have quite much the same lower critical temperature, and if the temperature is lower than the lower critical temperature, then they are heating up the animal. So they are increasing the metabolic rate, increasing the oxygen consumption, and they are increasing it at the same rate in the summer and in the winter. But the animals that are acclimatized in the winter, they are able, because they have brown adipose tissue, that okay, in the extreme cold temperatures, they are able to increase the metabolic rate even further. Even the summer animals, they are not dying, for example, over here at plus 5 degrees of Celsius, but they must move more, because then they have, of course, they have this capacity to have the until they are in the maximum oxygen consumption. Then the other way is to have the acclimatization of metabolic endurance. It's been shown in several animals that okay, they are able to have for a long time higher metabolic rate in wintertime than in summertime. But still, it's not shown that okay, what is the mechanisms? Well, of course, we can speculate a little bit that okay, if in running and any kind of exercise, we can have higher metabolic rate because we have more mitochondria, more enzymes in the oxidative catabolism. So most probably that could be a good answer or good quest for these mechanisms. But someone should make the experiments first. Then the third one is something that we all know, that okay, we can affect on the insulation. And okay, if we have a summer fur and winter fur, so with the winter fur we have more resistance to this dry heat loss, and that's why the animals can have then wider thermoneutral zone. Let's have a few examples. So this acclimatization of peak metabolic rate is the norm in small and medium-sized mammals. So if you have for example, in the forest in Finland, a mole or a mouse, etc., they are able to have brown adipose tissue to increase the resting rate of oxygen consumption in extreme cold. So if in mouse that is summer acclimatized, it can tolerate maybe minus 20 degrees of Celsius, after which it has to move a lot to keep the body hot. But then in the winter acclimated, they are then just using the brown adipose tissue to increase the oxygen consumption. And that also happens quite often in the small birds. Then the other way is to affect on the insulation. And that's very typical in the medium-sized animals like foxes, lemmings, hares. So, for example, in this fox, okay, in the summer, with the summer fur, it starts to heat up the animal already at plus 10 degrees of Celsius. But with the winter fur, it starts at minus 10 degrees of Celsius. So there is 20 degrees of Celsius difference. And if we are comparing what kind of temperature, what is the metabolic rate with the summer fox in minus 10 degrees of Celsius, so very typical Finnish winter day in Finland, it would be maybe 1 milliliter of oxygen per gram per hour. And with the same fox in the winter time, the temperature could be even minus 50 for the same resting state oxygen consumption. So it's a very clever way to have it. And of course, why we have in the medium size and small size animal a little bit different kind of mechanism to have these seasonal changes. Of course, the easiest way to is that okay, we can compare what kind of fur or fat. So typically these medium-sized animals, they are quite furry. So there is more than 5 millimeter, more than maybe one centimeter of fur around them. So there is a lot of air that is not moving. So it's a very good insulation layer. But if you would imagine a mouse with 1 centimeter of fur around it, it couldn't move at all. And still, although we have these 3 different strategies, usually the animals can use more than one response. But these are just easier to detect. Okay, the same kind of comparison can be done also in larger scale. Although in the metabolic rate, it's always very difficult to compare different animals because it depends on what is the size of the animal and how the animal is moving, etc. But we can compare the relative metabolic rate. So estimating that okay, the metabolic rate in the standard or basal metabolic rate is 100, and then to compare for that, then we can check that okay, where is the thermoneutral zone, where is the lower critical temperature after which they will increase the metabolic rate. And we have tropical species that are increasing the oxygen consumption already at room temperature, and among them there is human. And also we can see that the metabolic rate is increased quite steeply. So at 10 degrees so cold, they are already having 3 times higher metabolic rate than in the thermoneutral zone. But then we have these Arctic species that have better thermoregulation in the cold temperatures. And that's why they have wide range in thermoneutral zone. They are increasing the metabolic rate at 10 degrees of Celsius or minus 10 or minus 30 degrees of Celsius. And also the steepness of this heat production versus the temperature is not so steep as in the tropical species. So they don't need to increase the heat production so much when it's in very cold temperatures. So that's why they can survive much better in these Arctic conditions. But then, on the other hand, if we have climate change and temperature is rising, there's also hot environments. And in these, the animals that are having low basal metabolic rate, they are favored. So with a very furry animal, you can have then some problems if it's very hot temperature. But if you're having low basal metabolic rate, you are producing less heat yourself. And that's how you can then have some kind of opportunity for if in the hot environments. Okay, beside being active, we can also be inactive when we are under the endotherms. So we can regulate the body temperature. So, and because if we fall the body temperature, it will reduce the energy consumption, but it also reduces the activity. So if you are a small mammal, most probably it's better to hide somewhere for this hibernation or torpor. And they are all based on the hypothermia. Because during the hypothermia, all the reactions are slower, and that's why there's less oxygen consumption. And that's how the ectotherms are working. So we have three different ways for the dormancy. First of all, we have hibernation, where the body temperature is lowered, breathing is low, heart rate is low, and the duration of the dormancy in hibernation is for several days. So here we have a comparison of the body size of birds and mammals, and they are all hibernating, and the average is somewhere around 200 hours. Then we have animals that are making the dormancy in hot environment. Because they have a little bit different kind of challenges, that's why it's called estivation. And the third way of dormancy is to have the pretty much similar things as in hibernation, but now they are less than 1 day, and that's why they are called daily torpor. And over here in the same picture, there are also birds that are having daily torpor, and mammals having daily torpor in these white circles. And you can see that, okay, now the torpor boat duration is about 10 hours or whatever. So they will sleep or go into dormancy for half a day and then wake up, etc. And in the previously, the hibernation was thought that, okay, they will just reduce or shut down the thermoregulation, and that's why they will cool down. But it's actually much more difficult. First of all, we have examples. So they will enter in the hibernation like this woodchuck, and it will reduce the body temperature to about 1 degree of Celsius higher than the environment, not in the same temperature as in the environment. So they are not ectotherms. They are producing heat. And it will be in the dormancy for 12 days, and then there will be arousal. They are producing heat and getting the high body temperature. Or then we have these daily torpor animals, like this wood-footed mouse. It will enter into torpor after midnight every day. And during the torpor, they have reduced the oxygen consumption by 90%, and then later on, quite much at the same time, about during the afternoon, they are having the arousal. So, meaning that, okay, they will increase the oxygen consumption. Most probably that means also that they are increasing the body temperature. And let's estimate that, okay, how much they save during this. So if you are, your body temperature is quite near the environment, then, okay, you are saving 90% of the energy. But actually, when you are arousing every once in a while, that can affect. And because the homeotherms are increasing the oxygen consumption in cold, it's better to be in hyperthermia if it's very cold temperature, because then you are saving more energy. And it's been estimated that, okay, they are able to save about 80% or 90% of the monthly energy use with this controlled hypothermia. And that means that, okay, you'd need 80% less energy storages. Or you can, if you have certain amount of food, now you can live with that food 80 times more. And beside the energy saving, in the estivation especially, the water saving can be also a main reason for dormancy. Because if it's hot environment, you are sweating, or then you are having these fast breathing, and then you are losing a lot of water. And in hot environments, then that can cause hibernation. And the mechanism is actually pretty interesting. So in normal conditions, we have in pancreas, we are releasing insulin, to which we are focusing on the next week. And this insulin is limiting the release of fatty acids from the white adipose tissue. And at the same time, insulin is increasing the carbohydrate oxidation because it was reducing the glucose concentration into circulation. And it's also limiting one enzyme, pyruvate dehydrogenase kinase. But then, when we have in the hibernation, insulin is not secreted. It's accumulating in the pancreas, and we have more fatty acids in the circulation. And these fatty acids are affecting on one receptor, affecting on this pyruvate dehydrogenase kinase that is limiting the carbohydrate oxidation. Okay, no sugar metabolism, but now we have fatty acids that are affecting directly on the fatty acid oxidation, but also this pyruvate dehydrogenase kinase is now also activating it. So that's why during the hibernation, we are turning from the carbohydrate oxidation to fatty acid oxidation. And of course, fatty acid oxidation means that, okay, we are requiring some oxygen. And so it's quite controlled. So there are large metabolic changes in this controlled hypothermia, and some of them are related on stress related proteins. So there is a synthesis of new genes and affecting on the oxidative levels, etc. And then when we are in the torpor, the respiration is quite low, so then also the oxidative stress is minimal. But when we are getting on these arousals and increasing the body temperature, increasing the respiration, increase the use of aerobic catabolism, and increasing the oxygen use in the mitochondria, then we are also increasing the reactive oxygen species. And that's why during these torpors, we need quite much gene products of related on the antioxidants, etc. And it can be regulated. So we have learned that, okay, it's not the dormancy is not making endotherm ectotherm, because they are arousing where the body temperature is increased. And during the dormancy, the body temperature is more or less regulated and kept in tolerable limits. So it can be 1 degree of Celsius higher than in the environment, but if the environment is getting very low, the animal can be able to keep it still above, for example, 3 degrees of Celsius. One quite highly questionable has been that, okay, question has been that, okay, are the bears hibernating or not? And well, of course, because they have quite high body temperature. Okay, it's been evaluated that they are not hibernating, but actually because the heart rate is reduced to 1/6 and the metabolic rate is lower to about 1/4, and they have exactly the same biochemical changes as these deep hibernators. So that's why they are hibernators as well. As for example, look this Toyen article in Science. And last but not least, still on the insulation, let's have a human example. As we saw already previously, human is a tropical animal. So we are increasing the heat production already at 25 degrees of Celsius, and we are not very well tolerating extreme cold. But what we can do, we can increase the isolation with the clothes. And depending on what kind of clothes we have, we can increase or wider the thermoneutral zone. So if we have the warmest Western clouds for active use, we increase the heat production at minus 10 degrees of Celsius. Or in these Eskimos, they are increasing the heat production at minus 40 degrees Celsius. But also it affects that, okay, what we have different kind of shelters. So isolated cabin, we are having the heat production in all temperatures that are below 20 degrees Celsius. But in the modern houses, we don't have to heat them up until it's maybe 10 degrees Celsius. Thank you.